Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd Podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. John, former NFL scout, 3 and out. You know, I was thinking about it this weekend, that it's been an interesting summer. Copa, the Euros, the Olympics. There's just been a lot of big events, and my kids are doing a lot of traveling. Is that I used to always view like August as a kid, 4th of July to Labor Day as summer. And I still have a little bit of time I have to burn before the football season, but it feels like August now, these damn schools, high schools and colleges start by like August 12th. And it's like, what happened to August? Like, my kids are starting college like early August. So do you have a big August plan, or to you is August football?
Yeah, to me, July. We've been gone for a month. We were in Tahoe and home with our family. But talking to, I don't have kids yet, but a lot of people's kids go back to school early to mid-August at the latest. When I was in high school and even at Cal Poly in college, we didn't start till probably a week into September. The quarter system, UCLA, Oregon, they always had a big advantage in college because our first couple games, school hadn't started. So when I see these schools, junior high, high school, and college going back in a week, that's crazy to me. That's insane. Yeah, to me, I'm back in the football mode a little bit, but I'm a podcaster. You can podcast from wherever, but I don't really have anywhere to go.
I keep telling people before we get into NFL, I don't recall a year I'm more excited for college football. And I'm a Pac-12 guy, and it imploded. The big networks, Fox included, wanted an AFC, NFC in college football. Venture capitalists will probably own the sport within 5 to 10 years. But so I got into this discussion over the weekend with a friend up the food chain at USC, and I said to this person, I said, take out Saban. I said, this stuff takes longer than you think. This person, we were talking about Lincoln Riley. And I said, when Harbaugh got to Michigan, he actually overachieved in the first year. They went from 5 to 10 wins. I watched this first game. It was a win at Utah. I said, they weren't that good. They really didn't have a lot of NFL guys, but just power of personality. They got very physical, very fast. And the Big Ten wasn't as good as it is now. And they won 10 games. 2 years later, they won 8, and he was getting ripped because he was polarizing. And I said this. I said, what Brady Hoke did to Michigan is sort of what Clay Helton did to USC. Didn't kill the brand, but the rosters were so depleted. And I said this to the person that was critical of Lincoln. I said, does everybody understand how bad it was at USC? They weren't only 4 and 8. I was told that Lincoln and his group looked at the players and thought they had 33 guys that they could use, like could play. So as I look at their schedule this year, it's full of Penn States and LSUs and Notre Dames. They're not playing, these regional schools. They got LSU and Notre Dame as out-of-conference schools. What does USC have to win so you, John Middlekauff, go, I'm good with that?
Well, my buddy Guy Haberman and Yogi are doing Big Ten games. And they were back in Indy for the Big Ten, the media days, which is like 4 days long because they got 18 teams. And you start looking at the conference. Are we sure they're not a 7-5 team? I mean, is that possible? I mean, I know you're a USC homer, and listen, I root for West Coast teams, but
same.
Is 7-5 is 7-5 on the table? Do you acknowledge that?
If they can't beat Michigan, so Michigan lost 18 pros, new coach, and then really lost their best coaches, assistant head coach. So I think it's a much bigger rebuild than people think at Michigan. So my guess is if they can beat Michigan and go 1-1 to start, I think they win 8 to 9. If they go 0-2, 7's on the table.
I think the problem, and you use Harbaugh as an example, Jim was a Michigan man, right? So he resonated with the people there. He was part of them. And in college, more than the pros, that's a big deal. No one gives a shit where you're from and in the pros, right? You can be an LA guy, coach in New York if you're winning, great, vice versa. In college, it kind of matters. And let's face it, Lincoln is a Texas guy, had all his success at Oklahoma, came here, because they paid him a lot of money. And I do think the money factors in. I mean, are they paying $120 million if they go even 8-4? And this isn't his doing or his fault, but Oregon's going to be really good. Dan inherited a much better program. They had a lot more talent because of the way Mario recruited. But if they're 11-1 or in the conference championship game and in the playoffs, and they're 8-4, not even sniffing the playoffs, I do think it just gets weird because you're not one of them. And we see this in college football a lot. Our buddy Jim McElwain, he was having success at Florida. I mean, look at that place before and since, after Urban Meyer in the last 4 or 5 years, they ran him out of town. Now, it's different with Lincoln than Jim McElwain. He's a much bigger name, bigger brand, has more success at a higher level. But if you go 8-4, you start asking yourself, Penn State's rolling. I mean, if their quarterback is just decent, they should win 10 games. Like you said, Michigan, okay, they take a step back. Ohio State's got the best roster in college football. Oregon can't be far behind. Matt Rule knows what he's doing in college football. Luke Fickell, it's just a really hard conference. The other thing is, like, random teams in that conference, an Iowa or a Minnesota, always have an upset throughout the season. So it just becomes very, very difficult. And these people, a lot of rich people behind the USC program, and they're cutting enormous checks. And the bigger check that you start cutting, I think the more the questions get crazier. You see it in the SEC all the time. The reason they're as crazy in terms of the turnover with coaches when they stop, because the amount of money they're paying to not just the head coach, but the assistants. You have GMs in college football now. I got buddies making $300,000-$400,000 grand. They're just in charge of recruiting. So, I mean, I have buddies that scout in the NFL for 15 years that don't make that. So it's a money thing. And the expectations, you could argue it should be easier in theory with the transfer portal to get better fast.
So it's 2024, and let's talk about something really, really important. If you're ever injured, check out Morgan & Morgan. It's America's largest injury law firm, and they are there for you. Over 100 offices nationwide. Think about that. More than 1,000 lawyers with over $20 billion, that's a B, $20 billion recovered for over 500,000 clients. Things happen in life unexpectedly. Submitting an injury claim with Morgan & Morgan is really, really easy. Like, winning in the NFL is hard. We know that quarterbacking in the NFL is hard. Submitting a claim is easy. You're ever injured? Check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial pound law from your cell phone. Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting for you to get a full and fair compensation if there's an unexpected accident in your life. And I've had a few. By the way, what's going to happen in college football in the next year? This is really a thing that's happening. So I've talked to 2 different athletic directors. Is these college programs are going to hire general managers. Because right now, these guys don't know how to work their cap. So let's say, I'll just take USC. They're making somewhere between 13 and 15 million NIL. That's what I've been told.
You're saying that's their budget to pay players?
That's their annual budget. They're building new facilities. That money's always easy to get. Boosters love facilities.
Put their name on it.
Yeah, right. NIL are getting about 13 million a year in that ballpark. They don't know how to spend it. They don't know. They just don't understand quite. They need a general manager. So I think what's going to happen in college football in the next 18 months, a guy like a Chris Peterson who works at Fox, a guy like a Chris Peterson, you hire Chris Peterson, you give him a good salary and see, Chris, you just run the cap. You organizationally kind of run our personnel. You don't get the heat of the coach. And I think that guys like Chris Peterson are going to have schools throw 7 figures at them and say, can you run from a personnel standpoint, organize our football program? Because these schools now are paying high schoolers, not seniors. They're paying juniors to announce they're going to the schools. So I think there's a massive shift going on. UCLA can't compete at all. Thank God they're moving to the Big Ten because the home attendance will buoy their revenue, but they have a debt service every year. They're in big trouble.
Did you see the highlight of Deshaun Foster talking at the Big Ten? Which is crazy because he was a high-level college player, a good NFL player. It's not like he's never been in front of the media. He's not some lifetime coach. It was pretty it felt very UCLA right now and kind of Mickey
Yeah.
Mouse, and they're going to be terrible. Jake Rosenberg, who I was DMing with this weekend, who I used to work with the Eagles, who was one of Howie's right-hand men with the cap, who worked in finance before he got hired with the Eagles,
Yeah.
left the Eagles and created a company and is now working with Oklahoma. He's literally signed contracts and worked with these contracts, and his business will only grow exponentially quick
Right.
because, again, obviously 13 million is less than 200 million NFL salary cap, but it's still, these guys aren't used to. And philosophically, Kirby Smart, I've heard, is very uncomfortable getting to a certain number with a high school kid. He will
Yeah.
pay his own guy once he gets established or pay a transfer portal guy. But in terms of a high school kid, I mean, Nebraska, Dominic Riola, who I think is the dad, I forget the
Yeah.
kid's name, who's the quarterback. There are rumors he got $4 million. And you follow college recruiting probably closer than I do. We have seen a million number one, number two overall guys. The guys that turn into Andrew Luck and Trevor Lawrence and Caleb Williams, those guys are actually the minority. The
Yeah.
majority bounce around, become average, get benched. That's a very risky proposition. Like you said, you don't have 50 million to deal with. So if you're going to allocate several million, wasn't the thing a couple years ago with USC? I guess it would have been 2 years ago when they had Jordan Addison and Caleb. Weren't those guys taking like 80% of their NIL money to the two players?
Yeah.
Now, they were worth it, but still, I mean, you better get it right.
It's a much bigger mess than anybody in the sports media is talking about. It is a shit show. It is. These schools are paying juniors in high school. Some of these guys take the money and then they flip their senior year to the school that comes in like in Oregon and pays more money. So it's a mess. So general managers are coming. I think venture capitalists could own chunks of college football programs, but it's pro football. And the other thing athletic directors are going to have to go through over the next couple of years, John, all these sports are driven by football. Basketball makes money for men and women at a lot of colleges. After that, they all lose money.
A lot of money.
A lot. I mean, but it's hard because if, let's say you have a swimming program or a golf program and it loses $1 million a year, but your third biggest booster in the athletic department supports their kid who's on the swimming team. So it's very, you have to be very judicious with your decisions, because a lot of times the biggest boosters, their kids, they got a scholarship in golf or swimming or water polo or fencing out east, hockey. And it's like the sport loses us $3 million, but the guy gave us $8 million. I think if you really privately asked athletic directors what they could do, they would all shave off 20 programs, 25 programs. You can't make money. And so I've said years ago, you should privatize football. But a lot of the biggest boosters at these schools are not football boosters. And so, but I'm here to tell you, there's guys out there, the Chris Petersons, Bob Stoops, those guys now, people are going to start calling them and say, do you want to run the program? You're the GM. Here's $1 million a year. Just organize this stuff, run our cap, and or ex-GMs at 55 who are just burnt out from crazy owners. There's a new industry starting in college football. General managers are a year away from being hired everywhere.
Well, that's why you're going to see it this year, and it's only going to grow the next 5 years, is the wiping out of all the random colleges when it comes to football. I was at the gym today, and this guy who looked like he played football was decked out in Washington State football gear. It kind of made me sad. I mean, we grew up on that program playing in big games. They're going to turn in closer to UC Davis in the next 5 years than they are back to Washington, because the money the SEC has made. I mean, look at the SEC, the amount they pay college basketball coaches now. I mean, they're a college basketball conference now. I follow college golf because a lot of the top guys go on to the PGA Tour. All the college golf programs in the SEC, they fly private because, like you say, they have big boosters. They have the football money behind it. And the Big Ten is not going to be far behind as they start making gobs of cash now that they've gotten Oregon and USC. And it's inevitable. It feels like Notre Dame, and those programs go, and the SEC gets Florida State and Clemson over the next decade. It's going to wipe out the little guy. And I started at Fresno State. They don't have a snowball's chance in hell to survive. And it's going to become the NFL light. Because I get a lot of questions like, why doesn't the NFL invest in minor league football. I said, why would they? College football produces all their talent and they don't have to spend a penny. So
Yeah.
why would they spend any expense on developing players besides once they have them in their own building when college football is doing it for them, right?
Yeah.
They're spending all the and football, like you said, makes all the money in college sports. It's also the most expensive program to run. It's why, where I grew up in Northern California, St. Mary's, Santa Clara. When I worked for Pat Hill, he played at Riverside. Those programs back in the 70s, Pete Carroll played at the Stockton School, Pacific.
Yeah.
They all cut football after a while because they couldn't afford it. And that's back, I mean, they were bare bones. So it just becomes, how does Washington State or Fresno State or New Mexico, whose programs forever, I mean, they were playing real football, how do they survive moving forward? And the answer is they just don't. That's just the way kind of business works, right?
Yeah. And for the record, you bringing up Pete Carroll's somebody that USC could hire and just say, you're our general manager. Pete would be great. He loves the school. The school loves Pete. So keep your eye on, for anybody listening, to Chris Peterson, Bob Stoops, Pete Carroll. These schools, they're looking for those guys to step in. I mean, Pete Carroll, wouldn't that be a great way to close out your career? He's got great energy. Pete's on USC's campus. He's the ambassador running USC football.
Well, why do you think most people would agree that Bill Belichick more than likely is going to at least get interviews and probably get a head coaching job? No one thinks Pete Carroll is ever getting a head coaching job again in the NFL. And I'm sure you saw the story last week. I mean, Kyle asked Bill Belichick if he wanted to be his defensive coordinator.
Right.
Bill wasn't interested. Why wouldn't he ask? He didn't ask Pete Carroll, who he'd gone against for 8 years. Didn't even he runs Pete's defense. And it feels like Pete, in a weird way, is like this relic, where Bill, who didn't have, I mean, Pete had more success the last couple of years than Bill. And listen, I agree. I would hire Bill over Pete, because if you really followed Pete, like, their defense was terrible, some of his moves, but it feels like Pete is just done. He's too old. And Bill's like, yeah, he's old, but he still knows what he's doing.
All right, forget what the calendar says. The football season actually, to me, starts Saturday. The Baltimore Ravens open their camp for the rookies. DraftKings has a best ball millionaire contest. It is the biggest fantasy contest ever. We're talking 15 million guaranteed dollars in the prize pool. 15 million from DraftKings. That's a big number. With two millionaires being crowned for first and second place. That is life-changing. If you're a set it and forget it type, then best ball is for you. No waiver wires, no roster management, bigger rosters so injuries won't end your season, only the draft, and that's it. You are set for the season. I like that, right? So you can play it and have a life too. Check it out. This year, DraftKings offering everyone a draft one, get one special. Everybody gets this. Your $20 entry fee, that's it, $20, scores you a bonus ticket. So get ready for the best ball week at DraftKings. Download the DraftKings app. Takes 90 seconds. Put in the code Colin. That's me, Colin. All customers who enter NFL Best Ball 15 million millionaire contest get a bonus ticket. Only during Best Ball week, only on DraftKings. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, all those rings and trophies for Belichick just puts him in a different class. And,
that's true.
It's like I always sort of laugh if you look at these bands that haven't had a hit in 40 years, they're still making millions a year playing at Foxwoods Casino. Once you're a legend,
Garth Brooks hasn't had a hit since the 90s.
And you're still making 10 million a year minimum. Celine Dion. So I think Belichick is just such a legend that he'll just make money on being Bill Belichick forever. Pete, had he won that second Super Bowl and that interception by Malcolm Butler, maybe he would be in more legendary status. He's more in a Mike Tomlin thing. Yeah. But I also think Pete's got a place, I think, in the North Shore in Hawaii. He's happy. I really think for Pete embracing USC, they love him. He is the most popular coach in the history of USC is Pete Carroll still today. I wish he would literally sign up and run their football management team, because I think that's where USC is going.